Good morning, I'm Herm Gailey, here to make sort of a one-of-a-kind or first-of-a-kind video. I have always had something of an allergy to the talking head type of video where somebody just gets on and they tell a story or make a speech or give instruction for so many minutes. There's no horse involved, there's no demonstration involved. But there are a few stories I'd like to tell, and it's a winter's day. Ground's frozen, I can't really ride. I was taking hay around to the pastures and my daughter stopped by with the video equipment, and I thought it's an opportune time to sit still and maybe tell a little bit about a subject we could all maybe think about, and that's self-control around horses. It's pretty well known and often said that in order to control your horse, you must first control yourself. I've heard a number of people say that. I completely agree. I also agree that it is easier said than done. In working with horses, anger, temper, aggression, fear, ego, none of those things really have a place. You are an instructor and maybe a companion, but you're not a combatant. And you're also not a victim. And unless you can step away from those roles, and unless you have the self-control to do that, you're going to wind up either in a fight with a horse or being victimized by a horse who will sense weakness, who will sense fear, who will sense that emotion, even when you don't think you're projecting it. So I thought what I would do is to go through my own journey in discovering how to control myself, how to have self-control around horses. I will tell you that this dates back quite a while. It's still a work in progress, but I really began to understand how important it was to step away from the old model of being tough with horses when I ran into some horses and frankly were a whole lot tougher than me. So I'll take you back in time quite a little way. The year's 1975. I'm all at 23 years old. I had been riding horses for other people since my mid-teens. Probably started maybe 150, 200 colts by then. Thought I was getting pretty good at it. What I was doing though, I know this now, and I kind of knew it then, but I thought it was the way you did it, was every colt was a conquest. I conquered these horses. I thought, like a lot of people believed back then, that you trained a horse by winning every fight. And the fact is that you will get a compliant horse if you win every fight. But two things are going to happen. You're not going to have the quality of companion that you would. Instead, you have an obedient, defeated enemy instead of a friend. And that's a shame. And certainly, for a long time, there were some horses out there I probably should have written an apology note to, although most of them became very useful, pleasant horses. But probably the process I put them through was a little more rigorous than what it needed to be. The other thing that goes along with being more aggressive with horses, with picking fights so you can win them, so you advance the horse by winning those contests, is you're probably going to be an old man by the age of 40. And a lot of guys who are, really willing to cowboy up and get tough with a horse, well, by the time they were in their 40s, they were looking for a job at the feed store or the tack shop or, driving a potato chip truck because they really had worn all the tread off the tire wrestling with horses. One of the fringe benefits to stepping away from that is I'm not 40. I'll be 70 my next birthday. I've got two-year-olds and I'm going to start this spring. And if I'd stuck with doing things the way I used to, I damn sure wouldn't be starting colts at 70. So I'm going to tell you about how I got there, or got at least part of the way there. Different people might think I'm still a little more aggressive than some, and I'm pretty definite, but I think I'm fair and I try to be kind. I learned self-control as a component of self-preservation. So 1975, as I said, I'd been training horses, and along the way I'd acquired a bad knee. And in the fall of 1974, I had the first of several knee surgeries. I will tell you that if you were to look at my right knee, you'd think I lost a knife fight with a midget. That's kind of the way things go, you know, when you've led an active life. And I was setting myself up to tear myself up early in my life with horses. And, you know, you pay the price, and I've got a fake knee in there now, and it's working pretty well, and I'm not trying to beat it up like I would have if I had stuck with doing things the way I used to. So the plan was, I had put together some money, had enough to get through the winter. I was going to take it easy and rehab myself over the winter, but you know what? Horse people are stubborn and they heal quick. My whole life, I had dreamed of going to Australia. And after about 6 weeks, I was walking pretty well, and I thought a trip to Australia was just what the doctor ordered. Now, I didn't tell my doctor, but I bought myself a ticket and I took off with no money, no introductions, knowing nobody, no prospects. I just thought that somehow or another things were going to work out. What I dreamed of was experiencing the big, empty livestock country out on the land in Australia. How I was going to make that happen, I didn't have a clue. But through a variety of lucky circumstances and the kindness of strangers, I wound up spending several weeks with an absolutely brilliant bush artist, a painter, who ran a cattle and horse station in New South Wales, and from there joined him on a trip with other members of what was then the newly formed Australian Stock Horse Society Board of Directors, traveling from station to station in fairly remote areas, doing what they called classifying horses, deciding if they were going to be allowed to enter the stud book, which was still open. And I got that incredible window into a lot of places. I was welcomed as part of the team, even though I was just a tag along. One of the members of that group was a gentleman named Bob Campbell. Bob eventually became the first person inducted in the Australian Camp Draft Hall of Fame. He was a terrific horseman, terrific stockman, and those qualities paled in comparison to his quality as a human being. I spent several weeks on his property with him, riding some horses, working cattle, helping him do some shoeing, which I was really bad at, but game enough. And from there, he got me an invitation to go to Milton Park Station outside Alice Springs in Central Australia. And this, frankly, was what I had dreamed of. I was actually going to have an introduction to a way of life that I never thought I'd be able to experience. The deal was, I was going to get to spend a few weeks helping out in exchange for that introduction on a place that was about 250,000 acres, 400 square miles, just about 80 miles outside of Alice Springs in the McDonnell Ranges, dry country but good country. Remarkably, this 400 square mile place was widely considered to be too small to make a living on. But the boss, Milton Willick, was a brilliant stockman, brilliant bushman, good horseman, and he had come to own this place by working his way up through managing a variety of large properties, including Wave Hill, a big cattle station in the Northern Territory that at that time was larger than the country of Belgium. And those kind of facts and figures just astonished me. So got a ride out to Milton Park. There was no telephone, no television. They called the neighbor and asked if this guy could come out. a person I had come to know in Alice Springs through Bob Campbell drove me out, and there I was. What happened, though, was that the couple of weeks didn't go as planned. They went way better. Milton and I hit it off. His family were hard-working folks who are running the place with a skeleton crew of folks helping them out. And a bit of help from a young, willing guy was welcome. Plus, there was a connection there. I think sometimes people who love land and who love horses and animals and the outdoor life, you know, that bridges all sorts of international gaps. So one day, Milton says, I want to take you for a ride through the horse paddock. Now, a paddock over there isn't a paddock over here. A paddock over here is a little small place you put your horse out to walk around a bit. Paddocks over there can be of varying sizes, and this particular horse paddock was probably 10 or 12 square miles in size. So we got into his truck and he drove me out through there, and he mentioned then that it had been several years since anybody had started any of the colts there on Milton Park. And would I be interested in taking that on and staying around for a few months? Well, it didn't take me long to say yes, but as you can see, it didn't take me long to have some second thoughts. As we drove through the horses, they were in different mobs, different groups. The area was big enough that instead of just being in one big group, they split up into sort of family groups and a lot of times age groups, sometimes similar sex groups. And every so often, I'd see a horse walking around, probably 2 or 3 of them, with their head down almost to their knees and their neck in an odd contorted position. And I said to Milton, what's with that horse over there? And he sort of growled. He'd just say, bloody Lacey. It's Lacey. And then he wouldn't say anymore. And after a bit, we came to another one. And, you know, I'm wondering, they had some toxic plants out there. Was Lacey some sort of a toxin that these horses got that caused them neurological problems? Or was it a person? What was Lacey? See the next one, head down. I say, Milton, there's another one. What's going on with these horses? He said, bloody Lacey the horse murderer. Well, I needed to hear more about that, and I pried out of him because he just didn't want to talk about it. The fact that Lacey the horse murderer was the last guy who had been the horsebreaker on Milton Park, and was the big reason why Milton had not been in a hurry to bring somebody else on. As it worked out, Lacey was a fellow who needed some work. He seemed handy enough around a horse. But unknown to Milton, he had no background in handling big, mature, unhandled horses. And he really wasn't qualified, but he needed the work and he thought it would work out. Milton had no idea that this fellow didn't have that background, so he hired him. And they ran a bunch of colts, and colts over there were a little different deal, as I was soon to find out. These weren't little 2-year-olds that were barn raised. These were big 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. So Lacey encounters this group of horses when they're run in. Milton gives him the equipment he needs and goes off to do something else. And Lacey goes to catch these horses. And of course, nobody witnessed this, or it probably wouldn't have happened. But apparently what he was doing was, when he couldn't catch them, and he roped one of them and it jerked the rope out of his hand, he came up with the solution of pitching a rope over their head, snubbing up quick to a corral post and hiding his head till the thrashing stopped. Milton got back to check on Lacey just in time to see one horse hit the end of the rope, break his neck, and drop dead. There were 2 other ones or 3 other ones walking around that would never raise their head or use their neck normally again. Suffice it to say that Lacey's tenure as the horsebreaker ended right then. And though I never had the courage to ask, Milton was a tough old bird. And he loved his horses, and he liked things done right. And It was a big place. And I wondered sometimes if maybe Lacey was buried somewhere out in those hills, or whether or not in some backwater bush town, Lacey was walking around with his head held low and his neck in a contorted position. Either of which I think Milton was probably ready to inflict when he saw what had happened to those horses. So I was somewhat complimented that Milton Willick, this great stockman, great bushman, good horseman, would think maybe I was an okay choice. And we drove through the pastures and, you know, the paddock, and I'd see big, not big groups, but half a dozen here, half a dozen there, a nice big stout horses, the kind you needed for that big country. You know, 15, 2 hands tall, 1,100 pounds, lots of bone. You could tell there was a lot of power there. And I assumed they were part of the working string that was turned out while, you know, we had other horses closer to the house in a smaller paddock that we could catch up, and I figured I'd probably swap them in and out. And I said, well, Milton, yeah, I'm willing to do this. We're going by a group of these big stout horses. I said, and you got some damn nice horses, but where are the colts? And then he said something that chilled my blood. He said, mate, those are the colts. And these weren't your 2-year-olds that I was used to starting around here. These weren't the horses I could bully if I chose to, and which I tended to do. These weren't big snotty colts that needed to be taught a lesson. These were nice but unhandled horses. We think in this country of the Mustangs. Let me tell you that these horses had never seen a man on foot in their lives. They'd driven by them in the truck. They'd moved them in out of the pasture with horses a time or two. The only handling any of them had was to be castrated. And that was a one-shot thing and not the kind of event that inspires confidence in a horse. So this was a different kettle of fish. And I realized pretty damn quick that though I'd said yes and I meant yes and I was going to do it, I was in way over my head. I realized really that I was Lacey. I had no more background than he did as far as handling these horses that had never been handled. Frankly, the Mustangs in this country that are run into a holding facility and they're run through chutes a time or two, they're hauled somewhere, they maybe are moved one time or two, and they see people all the time, probably have been a lot more acclimated to people than what these horses ever were. So I said yes, and I spent a sleepless night trying to figure out how I was going to do this, because right then, self-control began as a matter of self-preservation. I knew darn well that if I tackled these horses, they were going to tackle me back. That I had to find a different way besides just winning every fight, because I wasn't sure I could win a single fight. So the next morning, I kind of woke up with some circles around my eyes because I hadn't slept a whole lot, but I had an idea what I needed to do. And at 23, it's hard to admit that you don't know something, but it was going to become apparent anyway. So I said to Milton, you need to help me with at least one of these so I know how this works. So he then picked a 9-year-old mare who, among her other qualifications, had spent 2 or 3 years out bush. She'd escaped from the paddocks and had been running with the Brumbies, and she was wild as a hawk. And he said, mate, that'll be a good demonstrator. And by God, she was. And at age 63, Milton ran this mare in and showed me how he dealt with her. He taught me how to use a helper horse to get close to another horse. He showed me how to get a halter on a horse that had never been haltered. He showed me how to use something that the Australians use called a roping pole, where you slip a rope onto a pole with a little fork on it, drop it over the horse's head, pull out the pole, you got the horse caught. You do that in a small pen, and what you don't do then is get to swinging a rope around a horse that's really shattery and push him over the fence, which believe me, could happen. Even a 6 or 7 foot fence, I saw horses go over while I was there. So he took me through this whole process. And what impressed me wasn't how tough he was or how bold he was, but how calm he was. Not one time did he get rattled. The only thing he said that disappointed him was when he wanted to teach this mare to lead a little bit, he doubled a rope around her nose and taught her to step up. And in the process, she lost a bit of hide about the size of a postage stamp. And he said, I consider that a failure. And right then and there, I realized that this was the way I needed to work with these horses, and maybe the way I needed to address horses back home. You know, apply pressure when you needed to, be aggressive if the horse was trying to meet you with aggression, but with nice horses that were unsure, you needed to be sure, you needed to be slow, you needed to be steady, and you needed to win fights by avoiding fights. That's the best way. So bottom line, I tried to duplicate his process, and after those first couple of days, what I had been doing with horses and sort of the technical side was perfectly viable, and so I went ahead and I got these horses broke pretty well. We worked them on the station. I was there for about 3.5 months. At the end of that time, we took them to town to the Central Australian Show, and we sold a couple of them. We showed a couple of them. We did well in the show. We were close to the top of the sale, and everybody was happy, and I was still walking upright, and not a single horse was walking around with the Lacey syndrome. And it really changed my outlook. And what did it was knowing that I wanted to do this job, but I didn't want to die either. And if I had tackled these horses, as I said, I wouldn't have stood a chance. And it really changed my outlook. Just realizing that a horse can be tough, a horse can be big and unhandled and volatile, but you don't have to turn it into a contest. Years ago, I took a clinic from Ray Hunt, and what he said was, you know, a horse will never know there's a contest if you never contest them. And it's one of those fortune cookies that guys like Ray Hunt hand out that you keep forever. And that was another thing that moved me along toward this not contesting things so much. I bet a lot of folks out there are working on self-control or want to work on self-control or have achieved it. Good luck if you're on that journey. Congratulations if you've gotten to a good way station or the whole way there. I would love to hear from folks about your own experience as you learned to overcome fear or overcome excitement or overcome impatience or overcome anger or temper or aggression. Feel free to use the comments on that, because this is a big part of what we do with horses, is learning to control ourselves. And sometimes if you're a hardhead like I was, you need sort of a near-death experience to say to yourself, hey, I need to find another way. I think with the rise of what's now known as natural horsemanship, or whatever you want to call it, the sort of kinder, gentler way, people are aware of that from the get-go. But at the time I grew up, it was a new idea, and one that I was led to by that instinct of self-preservation. That's what it took, and it took a hold. And it changed the way I looked at horses the rest of my life, and was a lasting, one of many lasting lessons that I gained in my trek across Australia. So that's my long talking head story, and sorry there was no horses involved, but it's a nice morning to sit out and wait for the ground to thaw, and I couldn't resist the opportunity to tell a story. Till next time.